Welcome to this deep dive. We're going to share some really critical discussions that have been happening within the Gable Media Exchange Thought Leadership cohort.
That's right.
And the topic today, well, it's something we've really been grappling with. It's this idea of the coming crash, the implosion of generalist AI, and specifically why it just can't, at a fundamental level, reliably support real-world infrastructure. Things like architecture, engineering, construction.
Yeah, the stakes are just too high.
Exactly. The industry, AEC especially, it feels like it's reaching a kind of breaking point.
It really does.
For a little while, generalist AI felt like this huge wave, promising all sorts of progress. It was exciting. You can't deny that.
No, absolutely. There was a lot of buzz.
But what we've seen, what's become, frankly, glaringly clear in our discussions, is a really disturbing trend, this generalist AI. It isn't just stalling out. It seems to be actively degrading.
Degrading. And the core reason for that, thing we kept circling back to, gets a bit technical maybe, but it's crucial. These new large language models, they're increasingly being trained on just massive amounts of content that wasn't, originally created by humans or, more importantly, validated against real-world facts.
Right. It's AI-generated stuff feeding back into the AI training.
Exactly. Think of making a photocopy, right? Then you take that copy and you feed it back into the machine to make another copy.
And another, and another.
Yeah, over and over. And each time you get these tiny little distortions, right? Little flaws.
It gets fuzzier.
So when AI models are trained on text that itself came from other AI models, those inaccuracies, those subtle errors, or what we call hallucinations, those, plausible sounding but totally wrong or fabricated stuff, they don't just stick around.
They get worse.
They amplify every single cycle.
Right. They amplify. It's like a digital game of telephone almost, where the original message, that expert-driven, fact-based knowledge, it just gets lost, twisted, or replaced by just synthetic noise.
Noise is a good word for it.
And this isn't just some, abstract tech problem for Silicon Valley to worry about. For us, the people actually designing and building the physical world, the infrastructure society, depends on, this isn't just tech drama.
No, it's fundamental.
It feels like an existential risk. The very foundation we need, trust, reliable information, it feels like it's cracking, because the data these generalist AIs are learning from is less and less anchored in, actual expertise and verifiable facts.
And what really crystallized for us as a core issue is stark. Trust, safety. Those are the first things to go when this degradation kicks in.
Yeah.
Our industry, it's built on precision, on accuracy, on deep human expertise where good enough isn't just inadequate, it's actively dangerous. So generalist AI that isn't rigorously checked against reliable knowledge, it's not an asset in AEC. It's a liability. It completely flies in the face of everything we value when we're creating safe, functional structures that people live in, work in, travel on.
All the essential services.
All of it.
So this leads to a key question we really wrestled with. Why can't AEC just wait? Wait for generalist AI to get better. Let Silicon Valley iterate. Let version 3.0 or 4.0 magically fix these problems.
Why not just wait it out?
And the answer, which became just crystal clear to everyone involved in these talks, is that generalist AI is designed for exactly that general stuff, broadly applicable, good enough answers for the biggest possible audience.
Mm-hmm.
It's built for, brainstorming ideas, maybe drafting an email, summarizing a web page. It's optimized for speed, engagement, scale.
Exactly. Speed and scale.
Yeah.
But it is not built. And fundamentally, we concluded it cannot be built for the kind of mission-critical, high-stakes decision-making that the built environment demands.
Yeah.
That work needs extreme precision. It needs absolute certainty wherever possible. And it needs non-transferable accountability. Someone has to sign off.
That accountability piece is huge because the consequence of errors in AEC. They're not like seeing a funny glitch in a chatbot answer, are they? Or a weird image from an AI art tool.
Not at all.
These aren't academic problems. They have immediate physical, financial, and significant legal consequences. A miscalculated beam isn't a typo.
It's a potential collapse.
Right. An incorrect code interpretation isn't just awkward wording, it's a safety violation. It could mean costly demolition, rebuilds.
Delays, lawsuits.
This is precisely why the current wave of generalist web-scraped AI fundamentally cannot reliably support real-world infrastructure. And that's not us being cynical, it's just a hard truth based on the requirements of our work and, frankly, the observed behavior of these models.
Yeah, that realization was, it was a profound moment in our discussions, I think, seeing that mismatch so clearly.
But, it wasn't all doom and gloom. The good news that came out of it is that we didn't just identify the problem. We really started mapping out a clear path forward.
A constructive path.
And that path isn't about waiting for somebody else to figure it out for us. It involves us, AEC professionals, taking proactive control, leading the shift, building our own pathways.
Specifically through creating and crucially curating expert-driven AI libraries.
Taking ownership.
So let's dive a bit deeper into why we think this implosion is coming. Drawing on some of the specific points people shared, we mentioned the models cannibalizing their own outputs, that photocopy analogy.
Right.
But maybe get a bit more into the why. Why is AI-generated data bad training data for what we do?
Okay. It really boils down to ground truth. Human expertise, the kind embedded in building codes, engineering standards, scientific research, decades of professional experience, it's anchored in reality.
Tested reality.
Tested reality. Verified against physical laws, material testing, performance data, successful project histories, failures sometimes too.
Learning from mistakes.
Now, AI-generated content, even when it sounds plausible, it's fundamentally just a reflection of patterns and biases. The model learned from its original training data, which might have had flaws to begin with, combined with its own internal statistical generation process.
So it's reflecting its own reflection in a way.
In a way, yes. When you train a new model on that synthetic data, you're not refreshing its connection to external reality or verified truth. You're just reinforcing its internal statistical patterns. You're compounding its existing biases, its hallucinations, instead of grounding it back in facts.
It becomes a closed loop.
A closed circular system, and it just drifts further and further away from objective reality over time.
And that drift, that leads straight to what we started calling the illusion of general intelligence, didn't it?
Yes, that phrase came up a lot.
Generalist AI is designed to be a convincing mimic. It gives you something that looks intelligent, sounds plausible, very structured. It's optimized for chat, for speed, for giving you any answer quickly across a huge range of topics.
And for low-stakes stuff, hey, that's fine. It can be useful.
But that optimization, plausibility over accuracy, speed over verifiable truth, that's the fundamental mismatch for the life-critical, context-heavy solutions that are just non-negotiable in our field.
Completely. The built environment, it doesn't grade on a curve for plausibility.
No, it grades on physics
Mm-hmm.
and engineering principles
Yeah.
and legally binding codes.
And tied right into that, intrinsically linked, is the massive problem of accountability and provenance.
Where did this information come from?
Modern generalist AI, the kind you can easily access today, it often cannot reliably tell you where it got its information. It mashes up patterns, but it doesn't maintain a traceable link back to original sources in a way that would ever stand up to professional scrutiny or legal requirements.
Which is everything in our world.
It's everything.
Yeah.
Our industry is built on a chain of custody, on traceability, knowing the origin of every material, every calculation, every decision, every piece of data. How can you, as a licensed professional, sign off on a critical structural detail or a fire-rated material spec or a complex code interpretation if the AI tool suggesting it can't show you the specific section of the building code it referenced?
Or the standard it followed, or the research paper backing its claim? You can't.
You simply can't. That lack of verifiable sourcing, that inability for the AI to essentially show its work, it just fundamentally shreds the chain of trust that is absolutely paramount in AEC disciplines.
Yeah, you need to know the basis of the information to apply your own professional judgment, your experience, and ultimately take responsibility for it.
Which brings us back to why AEC can't just wait for the tech companies to sort this out. Their priorities are different. Their business models are different. And as we discussed, the built environment is just utterly unforgiving in ways that a general software product isn't.
We're not developing an app that you can just patch or roll back if there's a bug, right?
No.
When a structural design calculation is wrong, when a critical building code requirement is missed, when site logistics are misjudged and it leads to equipment failure or worker injury. The consequences are immediate, severe, often permanent.
We're talking risks to human lives, catastrophic property damage, huge financial losses, devastating impacts on people's livelihoods, their safety.
The difference between an error in a general chatbot and a mission-critical error derived from flawed AI advice in our field.
Yeah,
It's the difference between maybe a minor annoyance and a potential disaster.
absolutely. An AI that works well enough for drafting, say, a marketing email is incredibly dangerous if it's trusted for things like wind load calculations or fire safety material choices or advising on crane placement on a really tight urban site.
That's not hypothetical stuff for us.
No, that's the daily reality of the risk we manage. It can lead directly to catastrophic failure.
And then there's the liability piece again. The immense, non-transferable weight of legal and ethical liability in AEC are professional licenses, are seals. They aren't just credentials on a wall. When you put your seal on drawings, on specs, on critical reports, you are accepting real, personal, legal responsibility for that work.
Period. Full stop.
No generalist AI system, no vendor of that AI system can show up in court for you. It can't stand before a licensing board. It cannot accept liability for an error that resulted from its output.
That liability stays right with the licensed professional.
Always. This isn't something you can code away or push off onto a vendor with a disclaimer. It's a fundamental, non-negotiable reality of our profession. And current generalist AI offers absolutely no mechanism to handle this.
And adding to all this problem is actually getting worse, not better from what we're seeing.
That's the really concerning part.
Yeah. These generalist models are actively degrading for AEC purposes, specifically because the internet is just becoming saturated with AI-written content, articles, summaries, forum posts, even stuff that looks like technical descriptions, but it originated from an AI.
So the training data is getting polluted.
Each new generation of generalist models trained on this increasingly synthetic data becomes less anchored in that original expert-authored material.
So they're more likely to just repeat the same mistakes or make new ones.
Both. They're more likely to propagate existing inaccuracies and generate entirely new hallucinations, just like that compounding photocopy effect we talked about. This isn't some temporary bug they'll fix next week. It feels like a systemic issue with how these models are trained and deployed. They're becoming less reliable precisely when our need for reliability is absolute.
Okay, so given that diagnosis, that trajectory, what happens when this fragile foundation, this generalist AI approach, inevitably cracks more widely within AEC?
Well, the most immediate consequence, the first domino to fall, is the collapse of trust.
Makes sense.
Once professionals, maybe those experimenting with these tools now, realize that the outputs aren't reliably rooted in verifiable real-world expertise, that they can't actually trust the sources or the underlying logic, the tool very quickly becomes not just useless, but a significant liability.
Then trust in our profession. I mean, it's everything.
It's incredibly hard to build, takes years, decades sometimes,
Yeah.
and it can erode incredibly fast.
Yeah.
Just one or two critical errors traced back to unchecked AI output, maybe a misclash detection, an incorrect load path suggestion, a code violation that slips through, and professionals will just stop using it.
Or worse.
Or worse, they spend so much time verifying absolutely everything the AI spits out that the mental overhead, the time required, actually makes the tool slower and potentially even more dangerous than just sticking with established, trustworthy methods they already know.
That collapse of trust then leads directly to real safety and quality failures, doesn't it?
Directly. Poor or incorrect AI advice, whether it's a subtle flaw in a calculation recommendation, a misinterpretation of some nuanced code section, or maybe advice on site logistics that overlooks a critical real-world factor only someone on the ground would know, it can have disastrous outcomes.
We talked through some chilling hypothetical scenarios, didn't we? The risks are physical, they're not just numbers on a screen.
Not theoretical at all. And then there's a more subtle danger, but one we felt was equally significant in the long run. The potential for de-skilling within the profession itself.
Ah, right, the reliance trap.
If professionals start to over-rely on these unchecked AI outputs, if they start accepting plausible-sounding answers without checking the underlying principles against physics, codes, their own hard-won experience, we risk weakening the institutional memory of our firms.
We lose that built-up knowledge.
We do. And we risk discouraging the development and maintenance of the deep human expertise that really is the heart and soul of AEC. Why spend years mastering complex code interactions or nuanced structural principles if a chatbot gives you an instant answer?
But that instant answer might be dead wrong.
It might be plausible, but fundamentally flawed. And without that underlying human expertise, you wouldn't even know how to spot the error, let alone where to go to verify the actual truth. We really saw this potential erosion of foundational human expertise as a hidden but profound danger to the long-term health and competence of our entire profession.
Okay, so we've laid out the problem pretty clearly, the consequences. If generalist AI is facing these fundamental worsening issues, and we can't afford to just sit back and wait, what is the alternative? What's the specific path forward that we identified for AEC?
That's the crucial turning point, and it's where the most actionable, frankly, the most hopeful insights emerged. The path forward, and we were really emphatic about this, is not to just hope generalist AI magically gets better or wait for someone else to fix it.
We have to take the wheel.
We have to take the wheel. The future of successful, reliable, and most importantly, safe AI integration in AEC isn't about having more data, which is the generalist model, scrape the whole internet.
Quantity over quality.
It's about having better data. Data that is authored, curated, verified, and maintained by the real practitioners, by the experts in the field.
This brings us to the solution we really started to champion, building these expert-driven AI libraries. And we didn't just name it right. We identified concrete, actionable steps the AEC community needs to start taking, like now.
Absolutely. Step one is foundational. We need to systematically assemble and digitize our proven workflows and our existing knowledge base.
What does that mean practically?
It means taking the collective wisdom that already exists, the stuff embedded in established building codes, best practices, documents from professional bodies, internal firm process checklists that have been refined over years, valuable data from past project archives. Basically, the knowledge that is known to work, known to be safe, known to be legally compliant.
The tried and true stuff.
The tried and true stuff. And structuring it into accessible digital libraries. It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about organizing the bedrock of our profession in a way that machines can actually read and understand reliably.
Okay, that makes sense. Leverage what we already know works. But how does AI use that specific knowledge?
That's step two, and it's absolutely critical. We must power AI tools specifically with this real professional knowledge, and this is key. Integrate our internal human expertise directly into the loop.
So it's not about replacing people.
Not at all. It's not about replacing architects, engineers, construction managers, code officials with some kind of black box. It's about leveraging AI tools that are trained only on this specific, vetted data library. Using them to help sift, process, maybe generate potential solutions or analyses, but always drawing from that reliable knowledge base.
And then the human element comes in.
And then the non-negotiable part, using our human experts to review, validate, update, and annotate the AI outputs. The AI can be an incredibly powerful assistant, finding information, suggesting options based on the trusted data. But the licensed professional provides that essential human layer, the critical thinking, the final judgment based on specific project context, and ultimately the signature that carries the weight and the liability.
So the human role maybe shifts, but it actually becomes even more critical for that verification and validation step.
Precisely. The expert becomes the ultimate curator and validator. They ensure the AI output actually aligns with professional standards, fits the specific project context, reflects the latest knowledge or code updates. The AI helps navigate the sheer volume of information maybe, but the human ensures accuracy and takes responsibility.
Okay, got it. And step 3 involved working together, right? Collaboration.
Absolutely. Forming industry alliances is critical here. This challenge building a reliable, expert-driven digital foundation for our entire industry. It's just too big for any single firm to tackle effectively in isolation.
Need a united front.
We do. We need to work across firms. We need to collaborate formally with our professional associations, AIA, NSPE, AGC, groups like that. We need to engage with regulatory bodies. The goal is to create shared standards for how this expert knowledge gets digitized and structured, to establish clear AI safety benchmarks specifically for AEC, and potentially even pool resources to develop shared foundational knowledge bases that everyone can trust and build upon. This collaborative effort is absolutely essential to build an industry-wide, trustworthy digital foundation.
Collaboration is definitely key. And what about trusting the AI's output itself, even if it's based on good data? How do we ensure that?
That brings us to step 4, which we view as an absolute non-negotiable requirement. We must insist on transparent sourcing.
Show me the receipts.
Basically, yeah. Any AI tool used for mission-critical AEC work must provide clear source citations for its recommendations. It needs to be auditable. A professional has to be able to click on an AI-suggested detail or a code interpretation or a material property and see exactly which section of the building code, which paragraph of the standard, which entry in the material database it pulled that specific piece of information from.
It has to show its work, just like we learned in school.
Exactly like that. If an AI tool can't show you where an answer came from, if it lacks that clear provenance, that traceability back to a verifiable, expert-authored source, well, the principle we established is clear. It cannot be trusted for serious AEC work, period.
Full stop. That directly combats the whole black box problem with the generalist models.
Completely. And the 5th step then feels like the technical culmination of all these other pieces. Step 5 is the development and, crucially, the use of domain-specific AI. This means actively supporting the creation of, or maybe even building ourselves, language models and AI tools that are fine-tuned exclusively on this vetted, authoritative AEC content we've been talking about. Our codes, our standards, our proven workflows, our curated project data.
Specialists, not generalists.
Exactly. These models are specialists. They should not be trained on the open web where they just soak up all the noise, the misinformation, the general biases floating around. They need to be designed from the ground up to be deeply knowledgeable only within the specific domain of AEC, grounded entirely in expert knowledge, and built explicitly for reliability and traceability, not just for making plausible conversation. It's a fundamentally different technical approach, one tailored to the unique, high-stakes requirements of our field.
Okay, so assembling the right data, powering AI with it, human oversight, collaboration, demanding transparency, and building domain-specific tools. That sounds like a solid plan. And the strategic imperative that really came through loud and clear from all this was, don't just sit back and wait. Don't risk becoming collateral damage when this generalist AI house of cards starts to really wobble or collapse for our kind of work.
Right. Be proactive.
Instead, AEC needs to actively lead the shift towards these more robust, expert-driven systems. Firms and professionals who just passively wait for Silicon Valley or big tech, whose priorities, as we've said, are fundamentally different and whose models are just not suitable for us. They risk being left behind with tools that are, at best, unreliable, and at worst, actively dangerous.
The alternative is actually quite powerful, isn't it? We, the AEC professionals, the ones who actually understand the true requirements of the built environment, we can and we must become the architects and engineers of a safer, smarter, genuinely expert-powered digital future for our own industry.
And what does that leadership practically look like?
Well, it means being proactive about building and demanding tools that actually honor the unique demands of what we do. That precision, that non-transferable accountability, that absolute need for safety, that requirement for verifiable information.
It means using AI differently.
Using AI not as some kind of replacement for human expertise, but as a powerful tool to elevate and leverage that expertise, to make it more accessible, maybe more efficient, but without ever compromising on reliability.
And taking a stand.
And taking a firm, informed stand, refusing to use any AI tool for critical work if it cannot prove its sources, if it can't be audited, and if it can't, through its underlying process and accountability structure, align with the deep ethical and legal responsibilities we all carry as professionals in this field.
We also touched on some supporting arguments, some strategic insights that kept bubbling up, right?
Yes, several key points. One we return to often was this idea that generalist AI is optimized for what? Engagement, speed, and scale. That's its goal.
Get clicks, go fast, reach everyone.
Right. But in AEC, our core priorities are almost precisely the inverse: stewardship, accountability, and longevity. We have to prioritize accuracy, traceability, reliability over decades, and ultimately, the safe and responsible stewardship of the built environment that will outlast us. This fundamental inversion of priorities just highlights why generalist AI is structurally, culturally incompatible with our requirements.
Which led to that pretty blunt assessment. AI, as built today, is antithetical to the AEC culture.
It sounds harsh, but why? Because our culture is built on clear chains of custody for information, for materials. It's built on institutional memory, learning from past projects, both successes and failures. And it's built on a system of real, legal, and professional consequence for errors.
And generalist AI has none of that.
It offers plausible answers quickly, yeah. But without that foundational integrity, without the memory of past performance, without any possibility of real consequence for being wrong, it just doesn't fit.
But this mismatch, this failure of generalist AI for our needs, it actually presents a unique competitive advantage, doesn't it?
We think so. The next big competitive advantage for AEC firms won't just be about adopting any AI plugin that comes along. It's going to be about being the firm or being part of the professional community that defines and enforces the standards for expert-driven, trustworthy AI.
So the advantage lies in quality and reliability.
The firms that build or adopt systems based on verified knowledge, total transparency, and rigorous accountability, those will be the ones that maintain client trust, reduce their own risk profile, and ultimately deliver superior, safer value.
And where does real, meaningful technological disruption come from in this picture?
It doesn't come from just mass scraping the increasingly noisy open web, right? That just generates more potential problems.
Yeah.
Real disruption, the kind we need, comes from harnessing and structuring expert-curated knowledge. The AI that truly matters for AEC is the AI that can show its work.
Cite the code section.
Cite the code section, trace its recommendations back to licensed professionals who curated and verified the data it learned from. That level of grounded reliability. That's the only kind of AI worth trusting for the critical task we perform every day.
Now, shifting just slightly, we also connected these core issues to some related points that always come up around AI, like the whole narrative about AI replacing human workers or its actual impact on job complexity.
Right, those common questions.
When people outside AEC ask, so is AI really going to replace architects and engineers, or what jobs are actually being automated away? Our discussions actually offered a strong counter-narrative, didn't they?
They really did. The very implosion we're talking about, the failure of these generalist models to provide reliable, accountable outputs for critical work, actually highlights why deep human expertise remains absolutely crucial, indispensable even.
So the failure of bad AI reinforces the need for good people.
In a way, yes. The failure of unreliable AI kind of underscores and even leads to a sort of rehumanization of labor, especially in critical fields like ours.
We also talked about how much complex work humans still do, even in scenarios that get hyped up as fully automated.
And why that matters. Human input, oversight, error correction, critical thinking, they're still necessary at so many stages. This reality just underlines why the collapse of unreliable AI isn't some neutral event. It's significant because that necessary human layer, the part that has to check and correct the AI's inevitable errors, becomes a huge burden.
The more errors the AI makes,
The larger and more costly that human burden of verification and correction becomes. It eats up time and resources.
and we touched on why that AI job loss narrative persists even with this reality.
Often it seems driven by external factors, right? System incentives may be focused on optics like reducing reported headcount numbers for Wall Street or pushing the deployment of these unstable generalist tools without fully accounting for the actual operational consequences and hidden costs inside the company.
Which brings us to a real-world effect that came up among members. This generalist AI stuff is actually increasing complexity and workload in many AEC firms, not removing jobs or freeing people up for higher value tasks like promised.
Exactly. Because the system is unreliable, because it produces frequent errors or misinterpretations, because it requires constant fact-checking, it ends up demanding significantly more human intervention downstream to identify the problems, correct them, validate the fixes, and often just redo the work the AI botched.
It creates more work, essentially.
It requires substantial human time for what we started calling AI wrangling, wrestling with the output to make it usable and safe.
That's the real economics of AI replacement that people were observing behind the curtain. It might involve, offloading perceived responsibility onto the AI tool, maybe cutting headcount in one area for a nice financial metric.
But then quietly having to hire more people or just overload existing staff to perform all the cleanup duty after the AI's mess. Those are the people doing the AI wrangling, the error correction, applying the indispensable critical thinking the AI simply lacks.
And it just reinforces why the most advanced, most safety-conscious companies, especially in high-stakes industries like ours, still rely heavily and, frankly, will always need to rely on humans for these critical tasks.
Absolutely. For the AI wrangling, for the error correction, for applying expert judgment and critical thinking where the stakes are incredibly high, Human expertise isn't being replaced by these unreliable general models. If anything, its fundamental necessity in a field demanding high stakes, high precision, and absolute accountability is being highlighted and underscored by the failure of this current wave of technology to meet our actual standards.
So let's wrap up this deep dive, pulling together the key messages from the Gable Media Exchange cohort discussions. The central message feels very clear now. This implosion of generalist AI, at least for our purposes, is a reality we have to confront. And it poses a direct threat to trust, to safety, to the fundamental utility that forms the bedrock of the entire AEC industry.
Yeah, and waiting around for external forces to magically fix this specific problem for our specific needs, that's not a viable strategy. It's just taking on unnecessary risk.
The path forward, though, seems equally clear. It requires us, as a profession, to take control, to proactively build these expert-driven AI libraries founded on verifiable, real professional knowledge.
And that new foundation has to be enforced through unwavering transparency. It needs to be built with rigorous accountability baked in. And it must be guided by ongoing human stewardship and expertise. The future of AI and AEC isn't about accepting plausible-sounding answers from opaque, unreliable systems. It's about empowering our proven, trustworthy expertise with digital tools that actually honor and meet the unique, incredibly demanding requirements of the built environment we're responsible for.
So, as you listening to this, consider the digital tools you use, the knowledge you rely on in your own practice. Here's maybe a final thought. Something to ponder based on the principles we've really explored here. In a world where digital information is increasingly synthetic, easily manufactured, often detached from reality, and critically lacking in verifiable provenance, how will you personally ensure that the bedrock of your professional practice, the knowledge you depend on, the decisions you make, the advice you give, is unequivocally built on verifiable truth and undeniable human accountability? How does the integrity of the knowledge that you use, that you curate, that you create, how does that ultimately define the integrity and critically the safety of the structures you design and build?